Great. Okay, let me start. Thank you very much. First to Adam, Melanie, and Carmine, for organizing this, for having me. Second, I apologize. This is a purgatory right now because it's Saturday afternoon. This is presentation number 8, and it's supposed to be theory. So I will do something different. Before I come to that, let me make 3 advertisements, in none of which I have a stake. The first is this is, oh yeah, I just wait until people come in, then advertisements are more effective.
Yeah.
So first, not many of you may know, but you should all know, because given that you're here, you have an interest in these subjects. There is an academic society called CEO, the Society for Institutional and Organizational Economics. It has an annual conference. This year's conference will be held in Sydney, organized by Pauline Grosjean. Next year, it will be in Fontainebleau in Paris, organized by Maria Guadalupe, a management scholar and organization economist. And in 2 years, it will be in Warwick, organized by Sasha Becker. So these names should maybe ring a bell. There is a big difference between that conference and this one. This is very economics focused. CEO is 50% economists. The rest is very interdisciplinary. Like political scientists, historians, lawyers, management scholars, sociologists, anthropologists, what have you, which usually makes it a little bit more interdisciplinary. Let's be neutral. Okay, so that's the first thing. Very much related to CEO, there is an annual summer school called the IOEA, Institutional Organizational Economics Academy. It has been run for more than 20 years on the beautiful island of Corsica every May. Call for papers. I mean, this is addressing both PhD students and young faculty. Call for papers usually out in February or so. It is held in May. It's a fantastic intellectual venture. Every year, about 20 faculty, new ones. There were Nobel laureates. There were all kinds of people there. So this is, I can just advise you or to recommend you to keep your eyes open for next year and see what's coming up. It's usually worth it. Final one, again, that has nothing to do with academics, but it has to do something with this paper. And in particular, that many of you are based in the United States. You may know or not that in Washington, there is this National Museum for American History, which is fantastic. And in particular, if you have an interest in how national identities are forged, related to several of the talks being here, they have a really, really good collection, and including descriptions and after we did this, I went there coincidentally, and I was like, I need this. It was really, it's great. It's really okay. Now let's get a little bit more academic here. So this is the clash of classification institutions. Who thinks Samuel Huntington is not too wrong, but this is broad. The joint work with Gillian Hatfield, who is a senior scholar and friend in law and economics. She was at the University of Toronto for long, is right now at Johns Hopkins, who has a new campus in Washington, D.C., very expensive, very highly politically connected. And with Vatsalya Srivastava, who's a PhD student at Tilburg, where we have worked on this and on a related matter. As I said, this is an applied theory paper, and I think this is absolutely not the time nor the temperature to go into theory, because it will kill all of us. So what I will do is basically I will treat the game theory and hence the game theorists in the room very badly, and it will only hover a little bit and try to give the key intuitions of the models which are here. So basically, I will first explain what on earth are classification institutions and why are they important. Then I will model 2 of them: social norms, which are a decentralized classification institution and enforcement institution; law, which is a centralized classification institution and enforcement institution, namely police. And then, this is why the title, we will bring them together and we will study in a theoretical framework what happens if we do have a social norm and we have a law coming in, think colonizers, for instance, a law with a different with different rules, and what happens. But I will be as quick as I can here, and so if you would say, "Oh, give me more details," I will say no, because this is not the time. So because what I would like to do is that at the very end, we have suggestions for a couple of applications. And here I really rely on you. So I want to make this as interactive as possible, because right now we are kind of theories are there, but we're in the process of writing up the paper. And I would like to know from you, which of the applications that I suggest to you, you think is most intuitive, most in line with the theory, or so, which is just most digestible, right? So that is, and the application level is not too. Okay, this is one possible kind of application. You'll get there, but let me just motivate it this way. Immigration. So we know immigration is important. Why is that? Many refugees globally, most of them in neighboring countries, but also in Europe right now, we have 30 million refugees, half of them coming from Ukraine. By the way, the respective number in the United States officially is 60,000. Here, kind of legal immigrants every year kind of admitted into the country. All the rest that you may see or not are illegal. What are the dominant reasons why people leave? Oh, well, because it's bad at home, right? There's persecution, there's conflict, there's war, there's violence. On top, you have more economic reasons. People looking for new opportunities, looking for work, looking for better education. Okay, so many reasons. However, as we also know, kind of this inflow is usually viewed quite skeptically by a significant share of the host populations. And why is that? Because these citizens and voters are concerned of not being able to lead the lives they want in the social, political, economic, and legal framework that they know anymore. And so the underlying idea is kind of basically the cultures and whatever the newcomers bring with them is incompatible with what we have here, right? There are a couple of more simple reasons, like, oh, they take away our jobs or so, but the kind of on the cultural level, this is the key. There must be a clash of incompatibility. This is kind of the same in cartoon format. So the fun part is we have these two persons here looking a little bit different. However, each of them having kind of the same idea about the other one. Let me just read it. Look at that terrible restrictive clothing. What do you expect from a male-dominated culture? Right? So how is this possible? We will here kind of, I want to try to shed a little bit of light about this kind of from a theoretical culture. Now, we will be using the definition of Alessina and Giuliano, kind of in the JL article, where they write, culture is a person's values and beliefs, one could say informal rules, which then can be contrasted with formal rules or formal institutions, such as laws and regulations and the rules of the political system. What is important, both for formal and for informal rules, is you need two things. You need kind of, if you want compliance with these rules, you need an enforcement mechanism. This enforcement mechanism, I will not go into too much detail, but the enforcement mechanism can either work via coercion, kind of you comply with the rule or I do something to you, or it can work via ostracism. You do as the role said, or we will not invite you to a dinner party, or we will not do any business with you in the future, right? So basically, we only have these two enforcement technologies, coercion and ostracism. However, and what we also need is a classification. What is a classification of human behavior? It is basically saying this behavior is acceptable and that behavior is not acceptable. And somebody must say what is this, kind of what real world observable behavior would be mapped towards the label acceptable and to the label non-acceptable. And this is what classification institutions do. The classifications can be social norms, religious rules, cultural traditions, professional codes, laws, political directives, many of the things that we've heard over the past 2 days, right? So somebody saying this is okay, this is not okay in this specific environment. And thereby, these classification institutions produce clarity about what would be right and would be wrong. Thereby reduce uncertainty, create trust, and contribute to cooperation, peace, and all the things are good. Right, so classification is something very, very important that as a standalone process is very often neglected in economic analysis.
Yes, there are questions.
Yes.
I think in some societies, this clarity is much less than in other societies.
Yes.
Are you going to be able to explain that?
A little bit. Let's see at the end. So some questions one could ask now is how to model culture, civilization, or law. So these classification institutions in a tractable way that allows to distinguish the channels by which one classification institution may affect another one if they somehow get together. What happens if classification institutions clash? And here kind of some key applications are immigration, colonization, but also technological progress. I mean, this is getting hotter and hotter by the day, right? Not outside, but kind of with the advancements in artificial intelligence. Like what happens if AI algorithms have a different classification than humans? And sometimes classifications that are not explicitly put into the algorithm in the form of reward functions, but something that developed a little bit over time. So that's difficult. If we have two classification institutions, do they reinforce or undermine each other? And then we can ask a couple of sub-questions which depend on the application. I will not give a literature review, but I want to introduce you kind of to two concepts. Yes.
So regarding your previous slide, I was wondering in what sense you consider the law as a classification institution? I'm a bit puzzled with the concept of the institution.
Okay, it's perfectly easy because I have a model. I can answer this question in 3 slides very exactly, very precisely. So let me kind of make sure we all know something about two kind of concepts. The first is the credibility problem. The second is the clarity problem. And the credibility problem is the following. I mean, so in the kind of in institutional economics, or the part of it that is called economic governance of McGrife and Abner Sticks, that are big names here. So for the last 40 years, basically the idea is think about a social dilemma situation, a prisoner's dilemma, where in the simple case we have two players. Each of them can cooperate or defect, right? Mutual cooperation is great for welfare and outcomes. Mutual defection is bad, but mutual defection is the standalone Nash equilibrium and equilibrium dominant strategy, right? So the question is how to move from effect to corporate core. And this is what, so this is exactly the credibility problem, how to move from effect to corporate, kind of to get credible on this trade. And this has been studied kind of both theoretically and empirically by many people over the past 40 years. Much more modern, basically, much more frontier research is the second problem, which is the clarity problem. And the clarity problem, even that goes back, I mean, for instance, Lisa Bernstein wrote about it 20 years ago in the context of trade associations, classifying what it means to produce good cotton or high quality cotton, how we can kind of, how we can go deeper here. Jill and Hatfield and Barry Weingast have a very good paper on this kind of in the Journal of Legal Analysis about 10 years ago. The thing is, again, in the context of this prisoner's dilemma game, think about the clarity problem means, how do I know what actually means to cooperate and what does it mean to defect? If we have an arrangement that says we want to meet at 3 o'clock, and in your culture, it's completely okay to be there at 3:15. In my culture, it's already kind of an insult if somebody comes 3:05, right? Then clearly the mapping between the real world action, namely when do I arrive, and the label, whether it is acceptable or not, is a bit not clear, right? That's a problem. So the clarity problem means, what does it mean to cooperate? What does it mean to defect? And this is solved by classification institutions. And importantly, we first must solve the clarity problem before we can even proceed to the credibility problem, right? It's meaningless to say, yeah, I want to cooperate. Yeah, I also want to cooperate. But if I think cooperation is something different than you think, then we have a problem, right? So that's kind of, so there can be clarity without credibility, but there cannot be credibility without clarity. That's a very general theoretical. Now, let me go into detail, and here, as I said, I will be very clear. The rough kind of setup is the following. We have many players, and of them, players are matched in pairs, random matching. Each player has a type, theta, which is the number between 0 and 1. I will come up with an application to make sure you get it into it. Players do not only have a type, but they also need to decide something. They have an action, which is something between 0 and 1. And if I can decide. This is an infinitely repeated game. We have a discount factor. So far, so good. Now this is the kind of the critical part because players every period again and again they're matched with somebody else and then they want to maximize this payoff function. What does this payoff function basically say? It has two components. The first component says I want to play my type. So this is just making sure if my type between 0 and 1 is 0.7, then the most preferred action for me is to play 0.7. If we take this in the context of this function, which is an externality function that I have onto others, think about the following situation. We are in a village. The village has a well with water, and everybody comes there every day once to take out a certain number of liters of water, right? And I can take out 0 until 10 liters of water. So you could imagine if my type is 0.7, this means I want to take out 7 liters of water because this is the amount I need to feed my family. Somebody else has a type of 0.1. That means that person only wants to take out 1 liter of water, maybe because they have some other water source at home or they live on their own or something like that, right? So this is an exogenously given kind of heterogeneous interest of pairs. And then there's the second component, and importantly, in this second component, there is no I. This means this second component is only an externality onto the rest of society. So this guy, player I, is completely unaffected by this part. He's only affected by what everybody else does. So meaning, with respect to my example, the more water everybody else takes out of the well, the lower the positive effect for me, or the higher the negative effect for me. Right? So that's basically the general setup. So that's the tragedy of the commons. And now, kind of. The first thing I don't report it here, but what you could do is to check what if we have anarchy. Anarchy is a political system, where there are no rules. Everybody does as they do. Fantastic. With some Trump voters think, I guess. So what you get out here is then everybody plays the type and don't care at all about the externality. And in the end, total welfare will not be maximized because the externality is structurally disregarded. Right? That's important. Anarchy is not welfare maximizing. In situations where you have externalities. And this is why we need kind of a classification institution. Classification institution number 1 is a social norm. Now I answer your question that you had. This is the core that the norm says. The norm says there is an upper threshold, LS upper bar. If my action space would be, I take out between 0 and 10 liters of water, and this could be, you cannot take out more than 5 liters of water. If you take out anything between 0 and 5, that is acceptable. If you take out anything more than 5, that is not acceptable. And then the norm also specifies what should happen if you take out more. Because by definition, you're matched with a partner, this partner sees what you're doing. So then the partner is, that's what the norm says, the partner is supposed to raise their hand. Raising their hand comes at a cost because it's always a bit dangerous, right? To confront somebody else who's just doing something bad, something unacceptable. So the partner is supposed to raise their hand and say, hey, this guy took out too much water. And then everybody else in the village hears that, stage 3, and everybody else, oh, somebody is taking out too much water. Then I'm supposed, that's what the social norm says, to come in and jointly punish this guy. And also, that's not so good for the guy who is punished, but also punishing, even collectively, is costly, meaning we need to incentivize it, right? So that's what a social norm does. And what a social norm is. Yes.
So you're not thinking about internalized norms such a way that I feel bad because I did something.
No, this is very explicit. I have kind of my type. This is what I want to do. I need so much water, and maybe the norm says you can only take out 5 liters of water, but I have a big family. My type is 6. So and then the question is, do I only take out 5 liters, or do I take out the 6 liters that I want? Right. So, and here, then I know this set of rules. And the question is, under which conditions will I, depending on my type, comply with the rule or not? What we have to introduce here, because the types are not observable, is what we call an index of good standing. An index of good standing is a label that is either 0 or 1. You either have good standing, you have great reputation or not. You have the samurai haircut and everybody sees immediately that you're kind of a trustworthy person who kind of fights for the community or not. And many kind of societies and communities have these kind of labels. So, I mean, very often it has to do with hair, it can be tattoos, it can be brandings, it can be all kind of, I mean, in modern day society, you can think about what these tokens are, but this is a visible token of good standing. And then kind of, let me not go into detail because otherwise that's getting a bit theoretical. And then kind of what happens kind of every period, kind of, we have 3 stages. So stage 1 is what Avner Greif calls the central transaction. Central transaction means in this part of the transaction, value is generated. So this is basically where each of the 2 players times n decides how much water to take out. And I do see whether my partner is in good standing or not. Second stage here, this is individual punishment. So then either I can raise my hand if I see that my partner cheated or not. And thirdly, if anybody kind of raised their hand, then everybody else is supposed to come in, and then we can actually decide kind of all at once. Oh yeah, I come in and join the punishment. There are a couple of nice properties to this because nobody's pivotal. Kind of, I could so we build in a strong incentive to free ride, but you will see that in equilibrium, people don't free ride. This is basically the equilibrium. Pretty stupid, I have to say. But what we find, and this is interesting, is that in equilibrium, kind of there are three types of people. Yes.
So I have one question regarding your punishment. So the punishment should be collective. It cannot be individual punishment because sometimes it's there's a substitution effect. So if I punish.
No. So and it is the assumption is that it is observable who raises the hand, and it is observable who punishes or who stays at home because they have to do some important work. Right? That's very important. And and the norm also specifies like that if you want to keep your good standing status, you have to participate in all 3 parts. Right? Now you could say, what the heck, I don't care about this haircut or whatever, but we will show under which conditions people do it. So equilibrium, what happens here? The easy part is we have kind of this 0, and if we have people who want to, who by given their type want to enforce the norm and want to comply with the norm, they just do so. So they, if the norm is you cannot take out more than 5 liters of water, and I want to take out 4 liters of water, I take out my 4 liters of water, I comply with the norm, easy. This is, then I call these folks norm followers. So that's part 1. Part 2, however, and this is interesting, it's an intermediate range. In the intermediate range, these are people kind of whose type is a little bit above the threshold of the social norm. So the norm says you can take out only 5 liters of water, but they want to take out 6, maybe 7, not 8, right? And they will, what we show here is they will also follow the norm if they are matched with another norm follower who is in good standing. Because then they could think, okay, this guy is in good standing. He will, that's what my incentive compatibility constraint tells me. He will actually raise his hand if I take out too much water. Then everybody else of the good standing guys will come in, they will beat me up, not good for me. So then it's better for me not to take out the 6 liters of water, but only the 5, right? So I will reduce it. So that is kind of the existence of the social norm leads to the fact that we have additional people complying with the norm, which is welfare optimal, kind of despite the fact that kind of on a standalone basis they do not. Then we have we call these people conditional norm compliance because they condition their norm compliance on the identity of the probation partner. And then we have people who say, I don't care. I need 10 liters of water, that's important. And if the other one punish me, then so be it. It's worth it, right? I get so much utility out of it. So, which also means kind of just as one feature of the equilibrium that we can kind of do have, I mean, not everybody behaves the same. And we have these 3 groups. Okay.
Sorry, so I see the need of cooperating and what is doing on norms. I cannot really see the clarity here.
I will come to it, but basically this is already clarity. I mean, as long as everybody knows what Ellis upper bar is, this is clarity. And so the norm says, it doesn't say, oh, you shouldn't take out too much water, and then everybody can identify what too much is also. So this is kind of, we establish here clarity, but the fun part will come with governance. Okay. I will not go into the intuition, I guess, because last year, I think I already explained it, kind of why people would do this. What is maybe interesting is that, so why should anybody raise their hand or join in punishment if this is costly? And the answer is not, I mean, in some earlier models like Kandori 92 or whatever, kind of the reason was, oh, you know, if you don't do as the norm says, the entire system will break down, right? And then you will be the sucker and kind of, and you are pivotal. We purposefully modeled this in a way such that you're not pivotal. The norm will survive even if you kind of defect in this case and you do not raise your hand. But what will happen then is that you lose your index of good standing. And because other people see that you did not kind of raise your hand despite the fact that you should have. And if you lose your index of good standing, next period, if you're matched with somebody who is not following the norm, you're a lame duck. You cannot kind of shame that person back into complying with the norm, and because that person will say, look, if you raise your arm, nobody will listen. People only care if you raise your arm, if you still have this nice haircut, if you have good standing, right? This is why you want to keep up your good standing.
Does that rely on the group being small?
Sorry?
Does that rely on the group being small? Like if one more person cheats, it seems like
Yes, of course. I mean, so this kind of if n grows too large, then these collision norm followers they need to. That's very good. Yes.
So the way we should proceed, if a person takes too much, I need to raise my hand for other people.
Yes.
Now you're telling me that if I don't raise my hand, other people know that he's affected,
Yes.
I don't raise my hand. So how those two different components?
It's not, sorry, then I was not clear. It's not only that others don't see it, but also kind of your partner kind of who cheated. He knows that he cheated, right? And he knows that you just did not follow or did not raise your hand. And consequently, kind of thereby kind of the knowledge whether you raised your hand when you should is kind of in the community. That's the assumption. There are only these two people close to the well, but kind of, I mean, we have a couple of assumptions kind of in the paper, avoiding collusion between these two people. Kind of, it is not possible that they get together now, close at the well, like, hey, come on, today you take 9, I take 9, we do as if we only took 5. That is not possible.
In a sense, what you're describing is that this person say unity, I defected, he should have raised his hand, but he didn't.
Yes.
When I do that, I have to say I defected in the first place. Then he defected by not calling me out. So in a sense, I'm saying also seems to me as if something other than they said. So I'm not completely.
Let us discuss that later. There is a point here. I mean, so I know that we have solved it in the game, but I'm with you that it looks a bit shady right now. It is not. Let me just claim that. Let me rush in the interest of time. Yes, so that's roughly speaking, that's the social norm of equilibrium. Then if I go over and kind of here, I'm even a bit quicker kind of regarding law. Law also, by assumption, does something very related as the social norm. The law says you can take out only so many liters of water from the well. That's what the law says. And otherwise, kind of what happens, we have police. So here there is no decentralized enforcement, no haircuts, nobody needs to raise their hand or so. I mean, we had that in an extension, but it doesn't change the equilibrium, so we keep things simple. So here the enforcement technology is that there is police, and then the timing is that again, first players are matched and payers are kind of they take their actions. In the second stage, the police raids happen with a certain probability eta, and this eta is police efficacy, right? So to have a measure. And if the police come in and they find that somebody kind of cheated, then they would punish the wrongdoer, and there would be kind of a punishment fine. Everybody's legal before the law, so all the details do not matter, kind of social background. So what do we find? Here we also find that there are basically three groups, but with different motivation. So what is similar is that everybody whose type is below the threshold of the law, kind of, I mean, they just act in line with the law because they want to. This is boring, right? So when we call these just law compliant. Now, the second group is there are so-called forced law compliance. So depending on eta, depending on this phi-p, so depending on the expected punishment, in case kind of I take out too much water, kind of then there will be some people kind of whose type is above this threshold, kind of who will also comply with the law, not because they want, but because they must. Otherwise, it's too fearful. Police is too terrible. And still, also here, kind of we find that those who are very high types, kind of who want to take out a lot of water, they will just say, okay, so then I'll accept punishment in equilibrium, but it's better if I have all this water. Okay, so basically, this is in a very simple fashion. These are the two equilibrium. Now, the interesting part is what happens if we bring together both, right? So the idea is we have a social norm that exists. And now in principle, there are two options. The first is that a new law comes in, where the law by assumption has kind of an upper threshold, which is a bit stricter than the social norm. We have a sister paper that shows that ceteris paribus, law can be stricter, kind of can require less and still get same compliance, but that's not important for here. But the thing is kind of the law, kind of the clash of classification institutions would exactly be this, kind of we have our actions here and the law says this is okay, that is not okay, but the norm says all these are okay. And so here we would have a zone where the law says that is illegal, but the norm says, oh, it's okay. Right? So we can prove a little bit, right? So that's it. So what would happen? We can also kind of in the same framework, and this is relevant to Anna's paper kind of earlier today. We can study just what happens if we have kind of a host or an indigenous norm, and the incoming kind of classification institution is also a norm, but one that has a different LSF, basically. And then what we identify here is three different channels. Let me make it short. All lead to the degradation of the norm. The norm will decrease in effectiveness, but in three different ways. The first is there is some crowding out. So as long as the law is sufficiently harsh, either because the efficacy is high or the punishment is high, then there will be crowding out. And this means that the incentives to enforce the norms, they will decrease as classifications get closer to each other. So they're basically, if I'm a norm complier, a norm follower, and I have good standing, I'm supposed kind of to enforce the norm, but I know there will also be police, and with probability eta, the police will punish anybody kind of who is not following the law. But if the law and the norm are to some extent overlapping, then actually I can save my enforcement effort and say, please, police, you punish that guy, right? Roughly speaking, that's the story here. This is what crowds out norm enforcement. In some cases, when there can also be crowding in, but that is not so frequent. The interesting part, there is a paper that you authored, I guess, which I saw you.
Yeah, it should just be axiom. So
Sorry?
like the last thing is actually axiom, not. So like that.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I've had. No, so we met at a conference a long time ago, and so I was completely fascinated by this idea. So, but kind of what Melanie kind of reported empirically is this paper that political repression in China in the 1700s led to reduced social capital back then and to less engagement in community affairs and more political apathy in affected districts today, right? So brutal police enforcement kills social norm enforcement. That was kind of the empirical story, and here kind of there would be something like a theoretical channel that supports it. But that's it. Okay, second channel, gradual decay of norms if norm enforcement strategy is inflexible. The problem is here, and this is also, I think this is really interesting because we were forced to model social norm enforcement with these 3 stages: central transaction, hand raising, everybody coming in. This is complicated shit, yeah? And this means that in reality, in reality, social norms are complicated and are complex. And so if the environment changes a little bit, thank you, if the environment changes a little bit, then it will collapse sooner or later, gradually. So that's the second channel. Empirical hypothesis comes from this. If there is a larger population of native form norm followers, then norms will be less flexible, and the quicker will be deterioration of norms. This is maybe not completely intuitive, but this is exactly what's coming out, right? And so this is a bit related to what you said, kind of that the size of the community, kind of with larger communities, it's even smaller to sustain this norm-based equilibrium, and this happens over time. The third channel is confusion. Confusion is a classical channel that you have in immigration. If there is kind of one group coming in and we have a kind of a host group, but if I'm matched with a partner, basically I see somebody in the street, but it's evening, I do not really know, is this guy from my culture or from the other culture? What norms will this person follow? The confusion. So then, in the game theoretic model, I have to think, what is my best response if this guy is from my community? What is the best response if the guy is from the other community? And so on, right? And this confusion part sometimes leads to the fact that people say, look, I cannot distinguish. Consequently, what do? I just follow my type. There can be cases where it's just the best to follow my type. And if my type is that I want to take out a lot of water from the well, so to speak, then I will do so. And that leads also to less norm enforcement. Empirical hypothesis here, those people who followed the norms before the clash only due to threat of punishment and which were not intrinsically motivated, they will stop following the norm first. So people at the margin of society, e.g. the poor, but not the very poor, because the very poor in this model they would have not followed the norm from the start. Okay, applications. First application, colonizers. So part of the motivation for this was because my co-author is from India, that he said, look, in India, some things work badly. For instance, there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of pollution, and it seems that nobody can really kind of organize this social dilemma problem. On the other side, there are, and then kind of theorists would say, yeah, of course, they cannot solve the credibility problem. Kind of they're unable to move from de facto to corporate to corporate. However, there's some other walks of life, for instance, organization of gigantic religious festivals, or the kind of the enforcement of certain food norms, like, oh, you ate beef. There are newspaper reports kind of a few years ago where people were killed by a lynch mob because they apparently ate beef, which is against so. So we could, okay, so here the country or the society is not able to solve kind of a social dilemma problem, but there they are. How can we explain that? This can explain it. Why? If there is a colonizer, the British, kind of coming in and having laws and enforcing these laws only in some walks of life, the model would predict that they kill the underlying norms that were there before. Consequently, if as of 1949, kind of the British withdraw, and the new state does not have the state capacity of the colonizer, then there will be chaos. Chaos in this model means no norm or no rule compliance whatsoever. Right? Everybody follows their type. Right? That would be pollution and corruption. However, in walks of life where the British did not make any rules, and that is food norms, marriage norms, in these walks, there would be no clash of classification institutions, and the old social norms would prevail and would still be followed until today. Right? From that perspective, the model can speak to this nuanced situation. Second application, failed states or also ex-Soviet republics. So, and this was the question, like, what should we do with Iraq a couple of years ago after Saddam Hussein was toppled or so? And there are several of these states, right? So here the idea is, after the fall of any violent or autocratic regime, the next regime can only avoid anarchy if it also relies on strong police enforcement. Why is that? Because building a norm is very, very difficult, right? In principle, all of these countries have had social norms making sure that social good problems social dilemma problems are solved for some time. But if you have kind of a violent dictator, an authoritarian regime, it could also have been kind of the Soviet Union, kind of then this would destroy the old norms-based equilibrium. And if that then this law and police regime falls, then kind of, yes, thank you. If this law and police regime falls, then kind of you have nothing left. That's a problem. And so the only way that the model would predict is the only way to solve this is basically to have a new strongman, right? Which is not very encouraging, but yeah, that's at least it's a hypothesis. Final application, how to organize a multicultural society, kind of the American question. And the question these days of any country kind of hosting lots of immigrants. There is kind of the uniformity or melting pot model, and there's this segmentation or solid bowl model. The simple thing is here. Either kind of we can all communities be equal before the law. That would be the we use law and kind of a centralized enforcement regime for everybody. What's the upside? Laws and police can create and enforce a new classification institution. However, in the short run, if the distance between classifications is large, then this is only sustainable by very high punishment, right? So that's the one thing. On the other side, on the other hand, you can have so-called identity rules. Identity rules where kind of several parts of the society are allowed to have different norms. For instance, clothing rules. So this would mean if the externality is high and the same for all groups, then it's efficient to have a uniform rule of law. For instance, criminal law, right? We do not want that people kill each other, so we better have police and law. However, in other cases, for instance, when it goes about clothing, religious freedom or so, actually there the utility function, the externality can be very group specific. There it may be optimal kind of to allow for this heterogeneity in groups. I wrap up. When individual actions generate socially relevant externalities, we need to avoid anarchy. Classification institutions delineate acceptable and unacceptable actions, thereby provide clarity. This is the basic for economic governance, solving the credibility problem. If we have only norms or only law or only religion or whatever, we do have clarity, but then punishment enforces compliance via different channels. However, if we have clashing classification institutions, there will be confusion. And this confusion in itself will lead to norms deteriorating either immediately or over time. There may be also crowding out. I mean, I've spoken about the channels. And if you have some time in the break, I would be very much looking forward to your feedback, which of the applications is best.